Enron Corporation, now heading into Chapter 11, closed today at 40 cents a share.
And many Enron employees will lose more than just their jobs.
I think it would be very difficult for anyone to say about this.
It was the 7th largest company in America. Then it went to zero. December 2nd, 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. $63 billion in assets. 20,000 employees. Retirement savings erased. Executives walked into courtrooms. Shareholders walked into shock. But this collapse didn't happen overnight. It happened years earlier, the moment accounting replaced economics. This case file is based entirely on publicly documented SEC filings, bankruptcy proceedings, congressional testimony, and federal criminal convictions. And once you see the structure, you'll understand why the fall was inevitable. The clock starts in the 1990s. Enron began in the 1980s as a natural gas pipeline company, just one among many in an industry dominated by legacy players. But under the leadership of CEO Jeffrey Skilling and Chairman Kenneth Lay, Enron's trajectory would change dramatically. The company didn't want to just be another energy company, it wanted to be an innovative powerhouse. By the 1990s, the focus was no longer on just natural gas, but on creating new markets for energy trading and positioning itself as the leader in financial engineering. By 2000, Enron had reinvented itself as a global energy trading giant. It wasn't merely an infrastructure company anymore. No longer was it limited to pipelines and power generation. Enron became a master at energy trading, derivatives, and market creation. In their eyes, Enron was the future of energy, disrupting an age-old industry with something called financial engineering. Their stock soared as high as $90 per share, and they reported $101 billion in revenue for 2000. The markets were buzzing. The executives were celebrating. Wall Street analysts praised their complex strategies, calling them revolutionary. But complexity quickly became credibility, and that credibility became their leverage. The company was now on top of the world, and no one was questioning how the math worked. The first cracks in the foundation appeared when Enron adopted mark-to-market accounting. Instead of recording profits as projects were completed over time, the company immediately booked profits based on projected future earnings, no matter how uncertain or far off those profits were. Essentially, Enron was reporting earnings based on future assumptions, not actual cash flow. While this gave the appearance of continuous growth, it was based on a deeply flawed accounting structure. While Enron appeared profitable on paper, the reality was starkly different. Many of its projects were not profitable, and future projections were often based on optimistic assumptions rather than tangible results. This marked a turning point. Future earnings started replacing real cash, and accounting assumptions became the fuel for growth. As Enron continued to grow, its true financial health was becoming increasingly difficult to assess. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Enron began creating special purpose entities, SPEs, shell companies designed to move debt off its balance sheet. The idea was simple: keep the company looking less leveraged by transferring debt to these outside entities. But this practice hid billions of dollars in obligations from investors and regulators. Enron's SEC filings, designed to look transparent, were masking a much darker truth. While the public saw growth in profits, Enron's internal financials were building up mountains of hidden debt. These entities allowed them to keep debt off the balance sheet and maintain the illusion of stability. The media celebrated them, the stock price kept rising, and executives kept pocketing their bonuses. Enron's true obligations, however, were quietly accumulating. The illusion phase lasted for a few years, with everything appearing perfectly stable, stock prices rising, bonuses paid out, and Wall Street analysts continuing to praise the company. However, as with any illusion, the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. Inside Enron, there were signs of a growing structural fracture. The question was, how long could they sustain this facade? In August 2001, Enron Vice President Sharon Watkins sent an internal memo to Kenneth Lay, warning him about serious accounting irregularities and the impending financial disaster. Watkins predicted that Enron's accounting methods would lead to a massive scandal and the company would soon be forced to face the truth. But the company didn't act on this warning. The stock was still trading at $70, and from the outside, everything seemed fine. Externally, the company appeared invincible, but internally, cracks were starting to show. Financial stress was rising. The stock price was still high, but the foundation was starting to erode beneath the surface. In October 2001, Enron announced a shocking $1 billion reduction in shareholder equity. The news was met with widespread disbelief. The company, which had once been considered a darling of Wall Street, was now facing an investigation by the SEC. Analysts began downgrading the stock, and investor confidence, which had been the bedrock of the company's growth, began to collapse. Within weeks, the stock price plummeted. It dropped from $90 to under $1 in less than a month. Employees who had invested their retirement savings in company stock watched in horror as their nest eggs evaporated. Enron sought a merger with Dynegy to stave off disaster, but the merger deal collapsed after due diligence uncovered the full extent of Enron's financial instability. Without a rescue, bankruptcy became inevitable. On December 2nd, 2001, Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. At that time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history, but bankruptcy was not the collapse itself. It was only the acknowledgement of what had been happening for years. Pause here for a moment. Enron didn't fail because the energy markets changed. It failed because the reported profits were disconnected from economic reality. And once the truth came to light, there was nothing left beneath the surface. The collapse seemed sudden, but structurally, it had been compounding for years. As the dust settled, the executives who led the company were brought to trial. Jeffrey Skilling, Enron's former CEO, was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy in 2006. Kenneth Lay, the founder and chairman, was convicted as well, but he passed away before sentencing. Enron's auditor, Arthur Andersen, was convicted of obstruction of justice, although the conviction was later overturned by the Supreme Court. Still, the firm's collapse was a direct result of its involvement in Enron's financial misreporting. The government responded with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, aimed at increasing corporate accountability and enhancing financial disclosure rules to prevent future corporate scandals. As Enron's financial stability unraveled, their massive house of cards began to crumble under the weight of its own deception. The announcement of a $1 billion reduction in shareholder equity was just the beginning. Investors, analysts, and the public were shocked to learn that Enron's financials were significantly overblown and that billions of dollars in debt were hidden off the books. In a last-ditch attempt to save face and avoid total financial ruin, Enron sought a merger with Dynegy, another energy company. However, this hope was quickly dashed when due diligence exposed the deep-rooted financial instability within Enron. The merger, once seen as a potential lifeline, collapsed under the weight of Enron's fraudulent accounting practices. Without the merger, bankruptcy became the only viable option. On December 2nd, 2001, Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, marking the largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time. This event shocked the world, but the collapse wasn't as sudden as it appeared. The bankruptcy filing was the final acknowledgement of a deeper problem that had been building for years. Enron's $63 billion in assets and 20,000 employees were now facing complete dissolution. The company's stock price plummeted, and employees, many of whom had invested their retirement savings in Enron stock, were left with nothing. For many, the dream of a bright future through their investments in the company turned into an overnight nightmare. The stock price had peaked at over $90 per share, but within a matter of weeks, it had fallen to less than $1. Thousands of investors lost their savings. Tens of thousands of employees lost their jobs, and the financial world found itself dealing with the fallout of one of the most catastrophic corporate collapses in history. As Enron's stock price spiraled down, the company found itself in an increasingly dire liquidity situation. Enron had been a highly leveraged company, relying on short-term borrowing to finance its aggressive expansion plans. With its stock price plummeting and its assets devalued, the company could no longer access the capital it needed to stay afloat. In a last-ditch effort to avoid bankruptcy, Enron sought a merger with Dynegy, but the deal fell apart when due diligence revealed just how deep the company's financial issues ran. The internal documents, once hidden behind complex accounting tricks and off-balance sheet entities, were now exposed, and Enron's real financial condition was laid bare. With no external rescue on the horizon, bankruptcy became inevitable. Enron filed for Chapter 11 protection on December 2nd, 2001. This move was designed to allow the company to reorganize and attempt to pay off creditors while continuing operations. However, the filing only highlighted the magnitude of the disaster. The collapse was not a sudden event. It had been years in the making. Pause for a moment. Enron did not fail because of market changes or external forces. Enron failed because the reported profits were disconnected from economic reality. For years, accounting tricks, financial engineering, and deceptive reporting had kept the illusion of success alive. The public was in the dark. Investors were in the dark. Even employees were in the dark. But once the truth was exposed, there was nothing left underneath. The collapse may have seemed sudden to the outside world, but for those inside Enron, it had been an ongoing slow-motion disaster for years. The company had built its foundation on a set of false assumptions, and once those assumptions were brought into the light, the collapse was inevitable. Once the bankruptcy was filed, Enron's executives were put under intense scrutiny. The scandal led to multiple criminal investigations, and several top executives were indicted and convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and other charges. Jeffrey Skilling, Enron's former CEO, was convicted on multiple counts in 2006, including fraud and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison, but his sentence was later reduced. Skilling's conviction remains a prominent example of corporate accountability, though his legal battles continue. Kenneth Lay, the founder and former chairman of Enron, was also convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and other charges. However, Lay passed away from a heart attack before he could be sentenced, leaving many questions unanswered about his true role in the scandal. Arthur Andersen, Enron's auditing firm, was convicted of obstruction of justice in 2002 for destroying documents related to Enron's financials. However, this conviction was overturned by the US Supreme Court in 2005. Despite the ruling, the damage was already done. Arthur Andersen had lost its ability to operate as one of the big five accounting firms, and its reputation was irreparably damaged. The firm essentially collapsed in the aftermath of the scandal. Enron's failure led to significant changes in corporate governance and financial disclosure laws in the US. In 2002, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which sought to increase transparency in corporate financial reporting and strengthen penalties for fraud. This legislation, named after its sponsors, Senator Paul Sarbanes and Representative Michael Oxley, was aimed at preventing future scandals like Enron. This case file is based on publicly documented records, SEC investigations, federal prosecutions, bankruptcy filings, and congressional hearings. No rumors, no speculation. Enron's collapse wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. Because eventually, accounting meets reality, and reality does not negotiate. Thank you for watching. If you want more documented power autopsies, please like, share, and subscribe, because the next empire will look just as stable until the numbers are audited.